Bard on the Plains podcast with Mike McPeek. It's about stories, mine and yours.
Today I'm happy to bring you the interview that I mentioned a couple episodes ago with my cousin Bob McPeek, and about how he had discovered some of his dad's poems and his attempt to set them to music and try to reconnect with his dad a little bit through the music and the poems, and visiting some of the places that he had been during the war. And I find it very interesting that he goes on about how some of the language that his dad used when he was writing some of these poems and how he had to adapt it for his song. But I went and while I was getting ready for this interview, I did some thinking, and I remembered that my dad and mom, back in 1976, to get ready for the, America's bicentennial, the Clark County wrote a history book for southern Clark County, and people put different stories about their lives and such in there. And in this book there is a story that my grandpa Ben McPeek had written about when he came out to South Dakota. And I'd kind of like to read that here before we start with the interview. On the 25th day of September, 1859, when the clouds of secession and civil war were appearing on the horizon, I saw the light of day in that country that was soon to see so many of his noble sons written in the pages of history, in the person of General U.S. Grant, General John A. Rawlins, General A.L. Chetland, General A.J. Smith, General J.C. Smith, General W.R. Raleigh, and Colonel James A. Maltby. I grew to man and state in that county, helping my father to clear up a new farm and going to the country school 4 months out of the year during the winter season. In the fall of 1880, I cast my first vote for America's noblest son, the lamented James A. Garfield, for president. After reading the life of Horace Greeley in my early boyhood, I then made up my mind to act on his advice. Go west, young man, and grow up with the country. After attaining my majority, I set about earning money to seek a home in the West. The next question to be settled was where to locate. Thinking the matter over a great deal during the summer of 1882, it brought to my mind some of the events that had happened in the Southwest, especially in Kansas, in the early 70s, when the hot winds swept over the state and left the inhabitants destitute. Again, my mind turned toward Dakota Territory. When we started by team for the land of the Dakotas on the 24th day of January 1883, the thermometer read 40 degrees below zero. We reached Ames, Iowa on February 8th and remained there until spring opened. When we continued on our journey, we arrived at Iroquois on April 22nd. After looking the country over several days, we drove from Iroquois to Clark on the first day of May, and then continued on to Watertown. The following day we filed a homestead on the southeast section, Section 27, Range 14858 in Hague Township. We returned the same day by rail to Clark, but the hotels in Clark were crowded to the limit. It was through the big-heartedness of Captain McSpadden that we got to spend our first night in Clark County in the haymow of the old Northwestern Livery Stable. But now on to my conversation with Bob McPeek about his dad, Robert Wayne McPeek. I'll kind of sketch the background and let you kind of paint the picture of, about life here on South Dakota, and let you kind of take it from there and talk about his, the military, and then your story about the book and everything. But yeah, so your dad, Robert, although I never knew him as Robert, I always called him Wayne. We always called him Wayne because there was a lot of Robert McPeeks in the family. It was just easier, to call him Wayne so we knew who we were talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure when that started, but that's definitely how he was known.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So him and my dad, Orvin, and our Uncle Shirley, and yes, I said Uncle Shirley, and Aunt Mary, they were born on the land that Grandpa Ben McPeek homesteaded in Hague Township in 1883. So this year it'll be 130 years that he came to South Dakota. So they were, born and raised out there, and that's just a few miles from the farm that my brother and sister and mom and dad's grandkids we hold in a trust now, and we are operating it. So it's only a few miles from there. So we've always had an almost, continuous presence in Clark County for the last 130 years. And your dad came to South Dakota. I remember him coming like maybe 4 or 5 times. He didn't get back here real often, but he like I say, he grew up here. He taught for school for a few years, and then he went and joined the military, and then that kind of takes us to where, I'll let you pick up the story from there about the song and the video that you produced based on his experiences living in South Dakota and in World War II.
Okay. Well, he was, I think, enlisted in the Army in 1941 prior to Pearl Harbor. But I think that may have been because drafting, his draftability was pretty high. He had a pretty low draft number. And these are things he didn't ever really talk about, or if he did, it's been so long I've forgotten. But some other things have been filled in by other cousins, even including Marvin Wyman, was actually taught by my dad on our grandmother's side of the family, who I never met until just this year, and he's probably 84 years old, something like that. So anyway, because he went in before the big rush that occurred after Pearl Harbor, he was pretty, I think, farther along in his training, so that he got the opportunity to be some of the first people that were sent into the war zone on the European, although at that time it wasn't even European, it was African. It was the African front, since the Allies decided that they'd invade Europe via Africa initially. So, and these are things that I've put together now at this point, for the most part, because his book of poems, which I'll get to, is more artistic and self-reflective than it is historical. There are some dates and places in there that I incorporated into my song. So I think that he was part of Operation Torch, which was launched in November of, or at least made landfall in November of 1941 in Algeria. And I'm pretty sure that he was part of the invasion force which left Virginia and made landfall going across the sea at the times when the German U-boats were pretty severely compromising safety out in those waters, all the way to Africa, and they landed in Algeria, which wasn't that big of a deal, I don't think, of an invasion, at least compared to what came later, because the French were by that time occupied by the Germans, and in some ways allies of the Germans, but in other ways not really. Obviously they weren't real happy about it. So if whatever alliance there was between the conquered French or Vichy France was kind of iffy. So once they established themselves in Algeria, though, then they got into fighting Rommel. And in the first battles against Rommel, notably at Kasserine Pass, they got whipped pretty badly. And by the time that they faced Rommel again, by now they'd brought Patton in, and he started to whip them into shape more, or they got more battle experience or more supplies or smarter, and they held their own in subsequent battles against Rommel. And on in across, at that point they're moving east in Africa into Tunisia, and Tunis finally fell, and from there it was a fairly short boat trip to Sicily. So then he was part of the Sicily invasion, which was nasty. Then they had to fight their way across Sicily. Then, of course, the next thing was to invade Italy itself, another pretty horrendous landing, etc. I know at one point, I think in Italy, under bombardment, his foxhole was actually buried by debris and dirt that just covered him. And so the story goes, and I've heard the story from a couple different sources, although I'm sure the original source is my dad. I don't remember him ever telling this to me. Uh, his fellow soldiers saw that that they couldn't see him anymore. They said, "Oh, McPeek's gone. We lost McPeek." And so I don't know if he stuck his rifle barrel up, or if, the sand moved or something, or you could hear under the dirt. But he between his efforts and their efforts, they dug him out, and he survived. But it was pretty brutal. It was pretty nasty, that whole episode,
Well,
that long episode.
I think I remember. I don't remember it real well, but I seem to remember him telling a story when he came out to visit us about you'd be running long in battle, and the guy beside you would maybe get cut in half by a mortar shell. That's just sort of a fragment of a story I remember him telling. But yeah, I did remember him making it sound like it was brutal and nasty and ugly.
Well, yeah, especially when you consider that I don't know if he had ever been out of South Dakota, since he went to college at Huron College, and got his teaching certificate, and I think he taught up near Sisseton. So he never really, if he got out of South Dakota, it wasn't very far, I don't think. And suddenly you go from this rural existence where you've known everybody all your life, and now you're thrown into chaos, where people are trying to kill you. So I'm sure it was, it's just unbelievable to me that generation did that. Of course, they were hardened by such things as depression and, having their father die when they were very young, and, other horrific things that happened. I don't think homesteading in South Dakota in the early 20th century was a picnic by any stretch. And what I do remember my father telling me is that, and this happened when I was in college, and I was somehow in biology class, I was studying the life cycle of malaria, and he happened to drop in passing that he had malaria. So he contracted malaria, as many soldiers did in North Africa and Italy. And that was a kind of a dicey situation. Not only is malaria nasty, but it's recurrent. There's a cycle to it where when the parasite hatches a new batch every couple of days, the fever mounts, and but the Japanese had kind of cut off the supply of quinine, I think, which was the major way that they were treating malaria at that time. So he was actually treated by I think one of the early uses of a new drug. I don't remember what drug it was. And I have a letter from him, and I think the only letter I have of him to anyone, from him to our grandmother, dated December 1944, and it basically says, "I'm in a hospital in France. I had a nice turkey dinner for Thanksgiving. The doctors came and poked and prodded, and they don't know. They're not telling me anything, and that's all I know. Bye." I mean, it was a little bit more than that, but not much. My dad was a man of few words, So it doesn't say I have malaria. So either he was in there for something else, or they didn't know what he had. But I suspect that was what it was, and that was December 1944, which, according to the war records that I have, is when he was discharged. So, he was one of the early people in, and got discharged before all the even nastier stuff happened, like the Battle of the Bulge and the invasion across the Rhine into Germany, because he was officially part of the Rhineland campaign. I don't think he actually fought. He may have fought a little bit in southern France. There was an invasion of southern France, but he was spared all the grief that came afterwards in the winter of 44-45, which was pretty gruesome. So these are all things that I put together post hoc, after the fact, because, as I said, my dad, like many World War II vets, but I think especially for my dad, because he was not a big talker. He was not one for small talk. he never shared much of that with me, or maybe he did, and I was a stupid kid and I'd say, "Oh yeah, Dad, yak, yak, yeah, whatever, Dad." I don't think I remember that. But also, my dad was not around much when I grew up because he was a career Army person, and when I was born in October 1951, I think in November, December 1951, he went to Korea. He went to Korea and he came back, and he got posted as a recruiting officer in Northern Illinois, which is how we ended up where I grew up in Waukegan. And then his next tour of duty, he got sent to Fort Riley, Kansas. My mother, who was born in Chicago, Waukegan's a suburb of Chicago. All of her family was in Chicago. Her kids had a nice, stable home there, I think. And I think she was not keen on going to Fort Riley, Kansas. So for whatever reason, he went there, we stayed. And that was pretty much the way it was, with the exception of a year and a half when he was stationed in Germany and we went to Germany when I was in junior high school. And then when we came back, we went back to Waukegan, Illinois. He went back to Fort Riley, Kansas. And then he retired, and that was about the same time that my mother died of cancer when I was 15. And then suddenly he was my parent, when he'd been absent most of the time. So we grew up in this nice neighborhood. There were a million kids. I could play baseball in the field across the street from my house. And I often told my wife, Nancy, about what a wonderful house I grew up in, what a great neighborhood, how all these fabulous memories I had of it. So somewhere around 1989, I think, we went back to Waukegan, and I said, let's go visit the house I grew up in. So we went over there, and we're sitting in the car, and I'm pointing at it, and there's this kid, maybe a 6-year-old kid playing in the front yard, and there's a bunch of people out in the yards, and his mother's a couple houses down where the school principal used to live. That was a bad day when the school principal moved into the neighborhood, but I digress. So anyway, she's down there, and she comes over to see what these strangers are doing and pointing at her kid, etc. And so we get out of the car, and I said, "Well, I grew up in this house." And she looks at me, she says, "Is your name McPeek?" And I said, "Yeah." "How'd you know that?" She says, "Well, wait here, I have something for you." So they had remodeled the house. They cut the roof off and added a second story. And when they did that, up in the rafters, they found this book. It was kind of a homemade bound, hard-covered book with yellowed Red Cross stationery in my father's very ornate handwriting, which everybody who's ever seen my father's handwriting comments on. It's just, the kind of stuff you saw around the classroom showing you how to write good penmanship. That was him. Except a little more artistic. And it's on the cover it says, "Rain or mud, shine or blow, a soldier's book of verse." And I open it up, and there are all these poems that he obviously wrote while he was fighting his way across Africa, into Sicily, up Italy, and into southern France eventually. And I was, wow, what do you do? And she said, "And by the way, it's yours. I'm giving this to you." So that was a pretty stunning moment. She had obviously found this book, knew that it was important, and put it aside, and had spent some time with it because she knew immediately the name and knew right where it was. And I don't know how long she had it. So one of my things I have in the back of my mind is I might want to try and find the woman, because I can probably trace the ownership of the house back to then. The neighborhood's kind of fallen into disrepair now, and it's not what it once was. Let's just say that. So I got this book home, and as my father would testify, if he were here to do so, I've played guitar since my teenage years, sometimes at loud volume in the basement, with my crappy rock bands in the 1960s and early 1970s. And my dad never complained about it. He was very open-minded about it. I wouldn't say he ever really said, "Oh, that's great," but he was fine with it. He tolerated it. So, and I have made a career in many ways of music production. I spent 20 years after I earned a PhD in psychology. I spent the next 20 years owning a record store and owning a recording studio, which wasn't exactly what I was trained to do, but I had a very great career. Well, a very meaningful, personally meaningful career running the studio. And I learned a lot about music and writing songs and producing songs and making music sound good and arranging and all those things that I wouldn't have had a clue or would have been very bad at had I pursued a career in psychology. So in the back of my mind, I thought well, it'd really be great to take one of these poems and put it to music and make it something. So, and periodically I'd get the book out and I'd earmarked some of the poems that I thought were most likely or that appealed to me the most, or I thought would work with music the best. So that was, when I got the book was late 80s, 89, 90, something like that. My dad had been dead for 9, 10 years by then. And I'm a much better songwriter now, I think. That was pretty early on in some of those learning moments that I've had about arranging and music and so forth. So I was never really comfortable or confident, I guess, writing songs. I wrote a couple of good ones here and there that I like. I still think are pretty good now. But really around, it's in the last 10 years, really, and especially in the last 5, where I've really gotten much better at it, I think. So in 2010, my wife Nancy and I, with some friends, went to Italy. I have a cousin on my mother's side who had a place in Vicenza, which is not too far from Venice. So we were in northern Italy, and I've been to Italy a couple times before that. And there are a lot of war memorials in Italy, and whenever I'm there, I think, geez, my dad, fought up those mountains or crossed that river or landed on that beach. So when I got back to Italy, I was just kind of freshly inspired, and I got the book out, and I realized that I didn't really have to stay perfectly literal. I didn't have to perfectly transcribe his words. I just had to stay true to the spirit, which liberated me to add a lot of my own words and to actually take one of his poems, which didn't really lend itself very well to music, but it lent itself, it was a fabulous story because it mentioned all the places he had been. And that included Sicily, Italy, Salé, which is in Africa, I think in Morocco. Places, some of the places obviously I knew, some of them I didn't, but I just used all those names and I collected all those names. And then he had where I started, my entry point was he had written a poem called Prairie Sunset, in which I could imagine him very vividly sitting in his foxhole on the beach somewhere, watching the sun go down over who knows what kind of scene, in remembering some of those amazing South Dakota sunsets, because it's such a landscape there, and just having a moment of thoughtful reverie about all that. So I thought, well, that's an amazing contrast to the brutality and the carnage and the death of that horrible conflict. So I thought, well, that would be an interesting segue. So that was my entry point, and that part of the song came together pretty quickly. And then I had the story part, which is the middle part of the song, which talks about fighting Rommel and invading Sicily, invading Italy, on into the Rhine, on across the Rhine River. I took it a little bit farther than he went, and that's what I had. So I played it for my songwriting buddy, my bandmate Fagan Arrow, and he said, "Oh, that's great. You need an ending." I said, "I thought I was done." So, but he was right. Yeah. So I thought, oh, what do I do now? Well, I turned to the book, and there's this poem called Paradox, and that was actually, I think, my favorite poem in the book, and that's the end of the song, which talks about, and this is pretty close to his exact words about. I think his words are something like, in graceful swirls of nonchalance, the swallows fly above, I don't remember exactly, above the carnage below. So the famous swallows of Italy, I'm sure you observed them circling above the battle as if nothing else was going on. And the graceful swirls of nonchalance is a really delicious line. I didn't use that one, but I think it's better as a poem than a song lyric. But that whole image of the swallows circling and so forth was my transition into the last part of the song. And then I tied it all together because sunsets include a lot of the color of blood. So that seemed like and the whole thing about suns going down in flames, and planes going down in flames, and all those images that sort of tied together, and that's how I ended the song.
And sunsets too kind of purveys the end of something, the end of a day.
Yeah, and that's something I hadn't consciously realized until you just now pointed it out. But yeah, it's amazing sometimes that you find out that the things that you put into a song tie together in a way that you didn't realize. And it could be coincidence, or it could be some sort of less conscious thing. And speaking of less conscious contributions to this song, I'm a research scientist. I do personality research on human beings, and so I'm kind of an empiricist, a logical positivist. I don't believe in things that I can't see in data, and even then I'm suspicious. So, but while I was writing this song, I was stuck, and I remembered that a couple of nights before, and it's one of those things where when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're half asleep. So I kind of didn't remember it until that moment, but I remembered that I had had a dream, and I had had a melody. I was singing this melody in my dream, and it was kind of this marching melody, and it was enough of an event that I decided I would get up and just hum the melody into my little recorder. So I went back and got the melody, got to my recorder, played the melody, and lo and behold, it was exactly what I needed for that part of the song, which is the middle of the song. So that was the starting point, and then once you have the end goal in sight, at least when I have the end goal in sight in writing a song, then I can get there. Then it's just sort of experiment and try a couple of different things, and let the melody sort of find its resolution or find its development. So I had some sort of subconscious or other kind of help there to finish the song.
Yeah, I know. I've listened to that song, and I can. I'm secure enough in my masculinity to admit that by the time I got done listening to that, my eyes weren't exactly dry. It had that sort of moving emotion to it, especially when you watch the video and you start putting all those pictures behind the words there, and it especially like when you got to the middle part there and you were showing, you were contrasting like Churchill with the guys in the foxholes, and some of the sacrifices that were made for the to win this war. It and having other people that that have fought in wars. It really kind of struck a chord with me. Of course, I can get a little emotional sometimes. Anyway, but like I said, it really kind of hit a chord with me, and I'm just going, man, this is just fantastic. And then I shared that link to your website where you have the video at with other people in the school where I work, and they thought it was really great. And we have a Veterans Day program here, and with your permission, we would like to use that next year if we could for part of the video presentation of this.
Absolutely.
Well, because
so I sort of see this in a way of paying my dad back for letting me make all that loud crap music in the basement. It's that something good may have come of all that music, and to be able to recognize what he did and what our parents' generation did is pretty. I definitely would absolutely be pleased if that happened. So.
Well, thank you, and I think they would too, because like I said, you look at it, and my dad, your dad, the people of that generation, they made sacrifices, and I don't know if even some of us today who have grown up better than they have, I don't know if we quite realize the extent to which they did have to sacrifice. I can remember Dad telling stories about, or Mom telling stories about, during the 30s. There's not a lot of trees out here in South Dakota, so they would have to sit there and take hay and tie them together in knots, and that's what they would use to burn. So they would have fuel to heat the house with. They didn't have running water; they had to go out to the well to get water. I grew up listening to a lot of these stories, but without actually having to live through it, you don't quite understand the sacrifices that were made. And the war is another one of those sacrifices that there were people that came back physically and mentally scarred from that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know how you could come back in any other way. One of those two or both. And and our generation gets upset if we only have 2 bars on our cell phone or so.
First world problems.
Yeah. I'm sad to say that I'm pretty disappointed in the baby boomer generation. Which I am one, and all the I'm probably 13, 14 years older than you. So, the 1960s and all that stuff, all the peace, love, and all that. That I really bought into that, and I really thought, that's really some good stuff. Peace, love, it's really good. We should do that. And instead, our generation went on to screw up the planet pretty royally in a lot of self-indulgence is my sort of cynical take on all that. But and certainly there are exceptions to that. But as a whole,
Well, yeah, and I have to wonder. I love technology. I mean, we're using technology to have this conversation, and for my podcast and everything. But I think I would be able to adapt because I grew up before we had all this stuff. But even like my kids, I don't know how well they would be able to adapt if they had to go back to, maybe one TV channel, having to haul water into the house, have to chop wood. And those were all kind of things that, maybe not the hauling in the water, but chopping wood and a lot of that stuff I had to do when we were living on the farm out there. And like I say, it's given me a greater respect for, the people of that generation.
Yeah, absolutely. They took it all in stride, and I think that rough upbringing, having to fend for yourself during rough economic times, which we have a little bit of now, but nothing like the Great Depression, was pretty good preparation.
Well, yeah, and I think it's in our genes here because I think as a introduction to this, I'm going to record this later. But Grandpa Ben wrote a story about him coming to South Dakota here, and
That's the one in the Clark County book?
yes, it is. Yes, and let's see. So let's see. When we started our team for the land of the Dakotas on the 24th of January, 1883, he's leaving from Illinois.
Yeah.
And Midwestern winters are not the subtlest in the world. He gets as far as Ames, Iowa on the 8th of February and then decides to quit. So I don't know if that, in the McPeaks, I don't know if we are really stubborn or really hardy. I haven't quite decided yet.
Maybe we're just not very aware of the environment. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's got us this far.
Oh yeah, and like I said, Dad, built a farm in the country and went on to raise, five kids, three of his own, and two of Mom's from a previous marriage, and we learned our lessons out there in the farm too about picking rocks. God, I hated picking rocks, fixing fence, all this other kind of stuff. So we had a good upbringing out there and learning about things, but. And I hope that people listening to this will kind of take the time to think about what people did to build this country and to get us where we are today, and maybe just kind of take stock of the way that we live. And I'm not saying we should go back, but at least think about how we got here and be kind of respectful and think about these things.
And appreciative and tolerant. But yeah, I don't want to sound like some old geezer complaining about these kids today.
I crossed over the 50-year-old mark. I think I'm an old geezer. I kind of complain once in a while. So.
Yeah, well, I got a decade on you, so. But there actually are some really amazing people of all ages, of course, and even some of my generation. I have a great deal of respect for.
Well, and, you were talking about playing guitar and stuff, and I remember when you came out, I don't remember what year it was, I want to say in the 70s, with your dad out to the farm here, and I remember you having that guitar, and I was at the point where, I was madly in love, well, I still am madly in love with rock and roll and that kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, wow, there's somebody in our family that knows how to play guitar, and I just thought that was probably one of the coolest things in the world, and I still have these daydreams of being a rock and roll star or something like that. Probably better left unexplored, but you got to have a dream. So
yeah, you should, and it's never too late. And I will observe that, and this is all things that have come to light to me in the last year in one case, or the last maybe 2 years. The first instance being from somebody who found me on Facebook, whose name was McPeek. And you may know the story of your father, who, when he was in the CCC, mm-hmm. were in Rapid City, or that general area, when they were building all the infrastructure for the parks over there, met another guy named McPeek. And they never could quite figure out how they were related, or if they were related, but your brother, Boyd, figured that out, that they traced back to a common ancestor. Well, part of that branch of the family got in touch with me on Facebook, and they were in Canada and been in Canada for a while. And they found out that I was a musician, so they sent me a picture of, I guess it was their grandparents' generation. There was the McPeek Family Orchestra, so in Saskatchewan. I don't know what it is with you crazy McPeaks in cold weather. Down here in Florida, it's 80 degrees out today. But anyway, so there they all are, the McPeek Family Orchestra, with this amazing picture of, there's a banjo and a guitar and some horns and a bass drum. And then in Ireland, one of the preeminent musical families is the McPeek family from Belfast, Northern Ireland. As I learned when I went to Ireland this summer, or last summer. The McPeeks are originally from County Derry, and not far from Lough Neagh.
And it's easy for you to say.
I'm sure I butchered it. It's a lake in Northern Ireland, in County Derry, right near where the Irish Rebellion began in the 1600s. Somewhere along the line, our branch became Protestants. Then my dad reconverted to Catholicism when he married my mom. But they're all Catholics. All the McPeeks there in Northern Ireland are Catholics. And they're all native Irish. But in Belfast, the McPeek family is a very famous four-generation family, known for playing the uilleann pipes in particular. So there's Francis McPeek the Fourth. Now I've only seen him on the internet. Is a fourth-generation uilleann pipe player, and has a band called McPeek, just called McPeek, that has a pretty impressive music video up on YouTube, and they spell it McPeake, which I think is the probably correct spelling. Back in the early 1700s, when our ancestor Patrick McPeek came over, as best we can tell, not everybody was literate, and there weren't dictionaries, so they just spelled things phonetically. So that's how McPeek ended up being spelled with two E's and no E at the end. And there are, of course, variations. There's McPeak and McPeake and MacPeak, et cetera, et cetera. So there is definitely some musical stuff.
Well, that's good to know, because growing up, you always kind of want to have a connection with somebody famous, and the best I could do in this country was there was an actor, I think by the name of Sandy McPeak, that had some. It wasn't starring roles. It was more than maybe bit parts, but probably secondary roles in a few TV shows or something like that. But you never really saw anybody too famous. Although there was that volleyball player, Holly McPeak, I think it was. But there's just, and it's not that you feel inferior, but you just want somebody that you can relate to and go, hey, Now if we look at grandma's side of the family with Wymans, I always wonder if there's a connection with Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones, but I don't know if we'll ever figure that one out or not. But
fairly common name, and there was I was told, but I think I was also told otherwise, that Jane Wyman was somehow related.
Well, but she took that name though, so because that's not her original name, if I remember correctly. So maybe not there.
Well, there was also General McPeak, I think, who's like one of the major Joint Chiefs of Staff kind of guys, or has been, mostly during, I think, the first Gulf War. I heard his name a lot.
That could be.
But it's up to you and me, I guess, to be the famous McPeaks.
Well, I guess so. And I'm not. I'm podcasting here. I won't say that I'm famous, but I get a few people that follow me. So, it'll probably be up to us to do something. But I guess that's kind of our family legacy. Is just we just go forward, I guess.
Yeah, we persevere through the winter of the plains, or multiple winters.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm going to record this story that Ben wrote, and when I get it posted, I'll let you know, because that is very wordy. I think there's something in our genes about being some sort of creativity. You do music. I like to talk. I remember your dad doing some painting. I think we have one or two of his paintings at home.
I have some other poems that he wrote. Like one of my aunts, the aunt that introduced my mother to my father, he wrote her a poem which she gave to me. So I didn't ever see him writing poems by the time I was around. But yeah, and that the story by Benjamin McPeak, it's got quite flowery language, but I think some of that is the era.
Yeah, of the times.
And some of it is probably just his propensity for ornate language. So I think there definitely is some artistic interest or some artistic aptitude in the family.
Well, yeah, because Boyd's a good artist, and Lois kind of plays the piano, and I just kind of like to blather on a little bit. But now Dad wasn't really. I wouldn't say he was artistic, but he was kind of intellectual. He was always fascinated by things. I think maybe that's where I get my kind of love of knowledge of just if you see something and you're fascinated by it, why not learn about it or something like that. So
Benjamin McPeek, he was elected to office or something.
yeah, he was. Well, I think he served out in Pierre in the state capitol for I don't know how long. Um, um, and then he was on the township boards and stuff. I kind of like the way that Dad wrote it. He was active in local politics until he started the family, and he had 4 kids to take care of, and suddenly had to quit um, because he made it kind of sound like taking care. Because there's like 4 kids in about 4 years there, so they kind of they had the efficiency going there.
And he was what? He was in his 50s when he got married. So
Yeah, 50. Well, I don't remember when he got married for sure, but reading in the book that he was 53 when he started the family. So he's 2 years older than I am when he started his family. I'm to the point now where the kids are moved out of the house or just about moved out of the house, and he's starting a family. Cripes, that makes me feel tired just thinking about it. That's why I can say that he homesteaded in South Dakota 130 years ago. I'm like 100. How'd Dad write that? 103 years older than he is. So, it.
he's 103 years older than you are.
You're right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was born, 103 before me. Yeah. So that's how we can have 3 generations of McPeaks in the state of South Dakota here with Grandpa homesteading because he was 53 when he started his family. Dad was 47 when he had me, the last of the kids. So we've skipped a couple generations along the line here. And I just became a great great uncle again a couple days ago, thanks to Lois's daughter. So yeah, we've got this kind of whole weird family thing going on here.
Yeah. Well, it's life is a weird smorgasbord. That's for sure.
Yes, it is. Wikipedia defines serendipity as a happy accident or a pleasant surprise. And that would be the word to use when Bob was telling about how he had discovered the book of poetry that his dad had written. And as I got to thinking about it, we had our own bit of serendipity involving Grandpa Ben. When a few years ago, one of the people in town here, the one of the local funeral directors and kind of amateur historian for the town, wrote a book about different postcards that he had collected over the years, and we bought it because the guy was local, and we thought the postcards would be kind of interesting. And we're leafing through there, and we find this one picture. It's the town of Willow Lake, Main Street, picture taken looking down Main Street, and there's this big eagle superimposed over the top saying greetings from Willow Lake or something like that. But on the back side of it, it was written, today we took the cows to town today, and it was signed R. McPeek, and we're going, well, we didn't remember there being any R. McPeek coming to South Dakota. There's about 7 McPeaks that was in Clark County at one time, but there was none that started with R. So we decided to go over to the guy's place and ask him about it. And he showed us the card, and I turned around and looked on the back, and it wasn't R. McPeek. It was B.A. McPeek, Benjamin Alexander McPeek, my grandfather. And we thought, that was curious. And we asked the guy how he had gotten the card, and he said he'd bought it from a postcard collector in Minneapolis. And the only thing that we can figure out is when my Uncle Shirley had his farm sale, we were thinking maybe that he had sold a trunk and maybe this card was stuck in there. But somehow, just for that card to get from here to Minneapolis And then back to Clark again, it just makes you wonder about how the universe works sometimes. Please go over to my webpage, bardontheplains.blogspot.com, to get the link to Bob's video at untoldwarstories.com, and watch it, and please leave a comment if you feel moved, and then while you're on my page, you can also see links to some of the other things that he does. Thank you.
If you have a story you'd like to tell, contact Mike on Twitter at bardontheplains or by email at bardontheplains@gmail.com. For more information about the stories in this podcast, visit bardontheplains.com.